My daughter-in-law humiliated my wife on a luxury cruise ship in front of strangers, and my own son stood beside her like nothing was wrong. They thought I was too old, too quiet, and too attached to my family to ever fight back. They believed my company, my money, and everything I had built over 30 years would one day belong to them. But by the time that ship returned to shore, I had already made a decision that would destroy the future they thought was guaranteed. Before I share the worst betrayal of my life, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? I always like knowing where people are listening from, because sometimes a story that happened in one family in one city can touch someone sitting thousands of miles away. My name is Richard Walker. I am 55 years old, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. For most of my life, I believed that if a man worked hard, stayed loyal to his family, and kept his promises, then one day the people he loved would respect the sacrifices he made for them. I was wrong about that, but I did not learn it in one day. It happened slowly, quietly, piece by piece, until one night on a cruise ship, my wife's tears opened my eyes completely. I owned a logistics company called Walker Freight Solutions. I started it when I was 26 years old with one used delivery truck, a small office that smelled like old carpet, and a wife who believed in me more than I believed in myself. Linda was with me from the beginning. When the company could not pay me a salary, she worked double shifts at a dental office. When the truck broke down, she used her savings to help fix it. When I came home exhausted and angry at the world, she never made me feel like a failure. She would place dinner in front of me and say, "Richard, one bad day does not mean a bad life." Because of her, I kept going. Over the next 30 years, that small business became a respected company in North Carolina. We handled freight contracts for furniture manufacturers, medical suppliers, construction companies, and regional retailers. We were not billionaires, but we were comfortable. Very comfortable. We had a beautiful house, investments, retirement accounts, and a company worth millions. But even when the money came in, Linda and I never lived like show-offs. We drove good cars, not flashy ones. We helped people quietly. We paid employees fairly. And most of all, we gave our only son, Ethan, every opportunity we never had. Ethan was 30 years old when this story happened. He was smart, charming when he wanted to be, and unfortunately, very used to getting rescued. I loved my son, but I had to admit that Linda and I had made mistakes with him. We softened every fall. We paid off his college loans. We helped him buy his first condo. When he wanted to work in my company after college, I gave him a management position, even though he had not earned it the way others had. I told myself he would grow into responsibility. I told myself a father should give his son a head start. Then he married Vanessa. Vanessa was 28, beautiful, polished, and the kind of woman who smiled with her mouth while judging you with her eyes. When Ethan first brought her home, Linda tried so hard to welcome her. She cooked a full dinner, bought flowers for the table, and even asked me 3 times if the house looked nice enough. Vanessa walked in wearing designer sunglasses on her head and carrying a purse that probably cost more than my first truck. She hugged Linda lightly, looked around our living room, and said, "This is cute, very traditional." At the time, I ignored the tone. Linda ignored it too. Mothers are good at pretending they are not hurt. After the wedding, Vanessa's little comments became normal. If Linda made dessert, Vanessa would say, "That's brave. Most people avoid that much sugar now." If Linda wore a dress to dinner, Vanessa would smile and say, "That color is interesting for your age." If Linda gave advice about marriage, Vanessa would laugh softly and say, "Things are different now. We don't really follow old-school rules." Ethan never stopped her. Sometimes he looked uncomfortable, but he never defended his mother. Other times he laughed along, which hurt Linda more than he ever realized. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I kept telling myself not to create drama. I thought Vanessa was just insecure. I thought Ethan was trying to keep peace in his marriage. I thought if Linda and I stayed kind, things would improve. They did not. The worst part was that Vanessa slowly started acting like she already owned everything we had. She talked about my company as if it was Ethan's future inheritance, not my life's work. She would ask questions like, "When Ethan takes over, will he keep the old staff?" Or, "Have you thought about updating the office once the company becomes ours?" She even once told Linda, "You two should really start enjoying retirement. There's no need to hold on so tightly." Linda told me not to react. She would say, "Richard, let it go. She's young. But Vanessa was not young. She was calculating. Around early spring, Ethan called and said he had a surprise. He wanted the family to take a luxury Caribbean cruise together, 7 days at sea. Stops in the Bahamas, St. Thomas, and Puerto Rico. He said it would be good for all of us. He said Vanessa had found an amazing cruise package and wanted to make memories before Linda and I got too old to travel comfortably. That phrase bothered me, but Linda's face lit up when Ethan mentioned the trip. She had always wanted to go on a cruise. For years, she had put everyone else first. She had missed vacations because of the company, because of Ethan's school, because of my schedule, because some employee needed help, because something always came before her. When she heard about the cruise, she looked like a young woman again. "Richard," she whispered after Ethan hung up, "maybe this is what we need. Maybe they're trying." I wanted to believe that. For her sake, I really did. So I agreed. I even offered to pay for the whole trip, but Ethan quickly said no. He said, "Dad, let me handle this one. Vanessa already arranged everything." I should have questioned that. I should have asked for details. But I did not want to insult my son. And honestly, part of me was proud. I thought maybe Ethan was finally stepping up as a man. The week before the cruise, Linda packed like we were going on a second honeymoon. She bought a navy blue dress for the captain's gala dinner. She got her hair done. She even bought a new pair of silver sandals and asked me, smiling shyly, "Do these look too young for me?" I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years standing beside me through stress, debt, fear, and sacrifice, and I said, "Linda, you look beautiful." She blushed like she did when we were newly married. On the morning we flew from Charlotte to Miami, Linda was excited the whole way. Ethan and Vanessa met us at the airport. Vanessa looked flawless, as always, with oversized sunglasses, white linen pants, and a gold bracelet that caught the light every time she moved her wrist. She hugged Linda quickly, then looked at her suitcase and said, "Oh, you brought that one? Well, it's practical." Linda's smile faded for half a second, but she recovered. I saw it. I always saw it. When we reached the cruise terminal in Miami, the ship looked enormous, like a floating city. Linda stood beside me with wide eyes, holding my arm. "Richard," she said softly, "can you believe this?" I smiled because her happiness mattered more to me than anything. For the first hour, everything felt perfect. The ocean air was warm. Music played near the boarding area. Families were taking pictures. Crew members welcomed passengers with bright smiles. Ethan seemed relaxed. Vanessa took photos of herself from every angle and posted them before we even reached the check-in desk. Then the first sign of trouble came. At check-in, the cruise employee handed Ethan and Vanessa gold-colored keycards. Then she handed Linda and me plain blue ones. I did not think much of it until the employee smiled and said to Vanessa, "You're in the Presidential Ocean Suite on Deck 12. Beautiful room. Private balcony, priority dining, full concierge access." Linda turned to me, surprised but still smiling. She probably thought Ethan had planned something special for all of us. Then the employee checked our cards and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, you're in interior cabin 2147 on Deck 2. Deck 2. Interior cabin. No window." I looked at Ethan. He avoided my eyes. Linda blinked slowly. "There must be a mistake," she said gently. "I thought we were close together." Vanessa laughed before the employee could answer. "No mistake. I arranged it that way." Linda stared at her. "You arranged it?" Vanessa slipped her gold key card into her purse and smiled. "Richard and you don't need a balcony. You'll barely be in the room anyway. Besides, the lower decks are quieter for people your age." For a moment, no one spoke. I felt something tighten in my chest, not because of the cabin, but because of the way she said people your age. Like Linda and I were luggage being stored out of sight. Ethan cleared his throat. "Dad, it's not a big deal. We're all on the same ship." Linda gave a small nod, the kind she gave when she was trying not to cry. "Of course," she said. "It's fine." But it was not fine. And deep down, I knew that cruise was not going to bring our family closer. It was going to show me exactly what my son and daughter-in-law really thought of us. I wish I could tell you that the cabin incident was the worst part of the trip, but looking back, it was only the beginning. When Linda and I finally found our cabin on Deck 2, she tried her best to stay positive. The room was clean, but it felt more like a closet than a vacation suite. There was no balcony, no ocean view, and barely enough space to walk around the bed. Meanwhile, Ethan and Vanessa were staying in one of the most luxurious suites on the ship. Linda sat quietly on the edge of the bed and forced a smile. "At least we're together," she said. That was Linda. No matter how badly someone treated her, she always found a reason to be grateful. I sat beside her and took her hand. "You don't deserve this," I said. She squeezed my fingers. "Let's just enjoy the trip, Richard." For her sake, I agreed. The first day at sea wasn't terrible. Linda and I spent time walking around the ship, watching the waves and exploring different decks. For a few hours, I almost forgot what had happened. Then dinner came. The cruise offered several dining options, but the main dining room was where most passengers gathered each evening. The room was beautiful, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and enormous windows overlooking the ocean. When we arrived, Ethan and Vanessa were already seated. Vanessa immediately looked at Linda's outfit. Linda was wearing the navy blue dress she had bought specifically for this vacation. I thought she looked elegant. Vanessa looked her up and down and smirked. "Oh, you actually wore that?" Linda's smile faded slightly. "You don't like it?" Vanessa shrugged. "It's fine. I just thought women your age usually chose something a little less ambitious." I felt my jaw tighten. Ethan laughed quietly and took a sip of his drink. That hurt more than Vanessa's comment. My own son. The boy whose baseball games I never missed. The boy whose college tuition I paid without complaint. The boy who used to run into my arms when he was scared. Now he sat there and laughed while someone insulted his mother. Linda looked down at her menu and said nothing. The rest of dinner was uncomfortable. Every conversation somehow turned into another opportunity for Vanessa to remind us how old we were. When Linda mentioned wanting to try the ship's zipline attraction, Vanessa laughed. "Seriously? I think that's more for younger people." When I talked about expanding one of our company divisions, Vanessa smiled and said, "Wouldn't that be Ethan's decision eventually? Not your company, not your plans, not your future." Everything was already Ethan's in her mind. By the third day of the cruise, I began noticing something else. Vanessa wasn't just disrespectful, she was obsessed with money. Every conversation somehow returned to the same topic. My company, our assets, our investments, our house. One afternoon, we were sitting near the pool when she casually asked, "So, Richard, have you officially decided who gets the company?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "Well, eventually Ethan will own it, right?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "I haven't made any final decisions." For the first time, I saw genuine irritation flash across her face, only for a second. Then it disappeared. Ethan quickly changed the subject, but that moment stayed with me. That night, Linda and I sat on our small cabin balcony. Actually, we didn't have a balcony. We sat in a cramped room staring at a blank wall. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Linda looked exhausted. "Richard," she said softly, "do you think Ethan notices how she talks to us?" I knew the answer. "Yes." She looked down. "Then why doesn't he stop it?" That question hurt, because I didn't have a good answer. I wanted to defend my son. I wanted to tell her he was confused, or pressured, or afraid of conflict. But none of those excuses changed reality. He saw everything, and he allowed it. On the fourth day, we arrived in St. Thomas. Most passengers left the ship for sightseeing and shopping. Linda and I spent the morning exploring the harbor. It turned out to be the happiest day of the trip. For a few hours, we forgot about Ethan and Vanessa. We ate lunch near the water. We walked through small shops. We laughed, real laughter, the kind we hadn't shared in a long time. Then, while sitting near the marina, Linda looked at me. "You know something?" "What?" "If it was just you and me on this vacation, it would have been perfect." I smiled. "I was thinking the same thing." She leaned her head against my shoulder. That moment should have been the memory I brought home. Instead, everything changed the next evening. The captain's gala dinner was considered the biggest event of the cruise. Passengers dressed formally. Photographers stood near grand staircases. Live music played throughout the ship. Linda spent nearly an hour getting ready. She wore the navy blue dress, the silver sandals, the necklace I had bought her for our 25th anniversary. When she finally stepped out of the bathroom, I honestly couldn't stop staring. She looked beautiful. Not beautiful for her age, not beautiful compared to someone else. Simply beautiful. "You look amazing," I said. She smiled. "Thank you." That smile would be gone before the night ended. When we entered the gala ballroom, the atmosphere felt magical. Hundreds of guests filled the room. Elegant tables, soft lighting, a live orchestra. Linda looked genuinely happy. For the first time during the trip, I thought maybe we would actually have a good evening. Then Vanessa arrived. She was wearing an expensive gold dress and immediately became the center of attention. She loved attention, needed it, fed on it. Throughout dinner, she kept making subtle comments. Nothing obvious enough to create a scene, just enough to chip away at Linda's confidence. Then came the moment that changed everything. The cruise director invited passengers to share short family stories and celebratory toasts. Several people stood up. A retired couple celebrating 40 years of marriage, a family reunion, an anniversary. Then Vanessa stood. I immediately felt uneasy. She took the microphone, smiled, and looked directly at our table. "Family is important," she began. Several guests nodded. She continued. "But sometimes older generations have trouble letting go." A few people chuckled politely. I felt my stomach tighten. Vanessa kept speaking. "They refuse to accept that their time has passed." The room grew quieter. She smiled again. Then she delivered the sentence I will never forget. "Honestly, older people just take up space when they should be stepping aside for the next generation." The room became silent. Completely silent. A few uncomfortable faces appeared around the ballroom. People knew exactly who she was talking about. Linda froze. I watched the color drain from her face. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Not dramatic tears, not loud tears. The quiet kind. The kind that come when someone's heart breaks. I slowly turned toward Ethan. My son. Surely he would say something. Surely this was the moment. Surely he would stand up and defend his mother. Instead, he laughed. Actually laughed. Then he raised his glass, as if Vanessa had made a clever joke. That was the exact moment something inside me changed. Not anger, not rage, something colder, something permanent. I stood up, without saying a word. I walked around the table and offered Linda my hand. She looked at me, tears running down her cheeks. I helped her stand. The ballroom remained silent. Vanessa looked confused. Ethan looked uncomfortable. For the first time all week, neither of them seemed confident. I placed my arm around Linda's shoulders. Then I looked directly at my son. He opened his mouth. Perhaps to explain. Perhaps to apologize. But I didn't give him the chance. Because for the first time in years, I realized something. The greatest threat to my company wasn't competition. It wasn't the economy. It wasn't market conditions. It was the possibility of leaving everything I built to the wrong people. And at that moment, an idea began forming in my mind. An idea that would completely change Ethan and Vanessa's future. Without saying another word, I led Linda out of the ballroom. And behind us, hundreds of people watched in silence. The walk back to our cabin was one of the longest walks of my life. Neither Linda nor I spoke. The sounds of laughter, music, and celebration faded behind us as we moved through the ship's hallways. Around us, passengers continued enjoying their vacations, completely unaware that my entire view of my family had just changed. When we finally reached our cabin, Linda sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. For several minutes, she didn't say a word. Then I heard her quietly crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to break my heart. I sat beside her. For 30 years, this woman had stood beside me through every challenge imaginable. She had sacrificed vacations, hobbies, dreams, and opportunities so that our family could succeed. And tonight, after everything she had done, she had been humiliated in front of hundreds of strangers by a woman she had welcomed into our family. The worst part wasn't Vanessa. The worst part was Ethan. Because strangers can hurt you. Enemies can hurt you. But pain from your own child feels different. It cuts deeper. Linda finally wiped her eyes. "I don't understand what I did wrong." My chest tightened. "You didn't do anything wrong. She looked at me. Then why does she hate me so much? I had no answer. Because the truth was simple. Vanessa didn't hate Linda. She looked down on her. There was a difference. Vanessa believed kindness was weakness. She believed money created value. She believed people only mattered when they were useful. And in her mind, Linda and I had already served our purpose. Now she wanted what came next: the company, the assets, the future. I wrapped my arm around Linda and held her close. Then I quietly made a promise to myself. No matter what happened after this trip, I would never allow Ethan and Vanessa to control everything I had spent my life building. The next morning, the ship was scheduled to return to Miami. Normally, the final day of a cruise is exciting. Passengers exchange photos, make plans, talk about favorite memories. For us, it felt like a funeral. At breakfast, Ethan sent several text messages asking if we wanted to meet. I ignored them. A few hours later, he knocked on our cabin door. Linda looked at me. I opened it. Ethan stood there alone. For the first time all week, he looked nervous. "Can we talk?" I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. "What is it?" He rubbed the back of his neck. Vanessa didn't mean anything by what she said. I stared at him. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood. "Didn't mean anything by it?" He sighed. "Dad, you're taking this too personally." Too personally. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked directly into his eyes. "When your wife humiliated your mother in front of hundreds of people, what exactly should I have taken personally?" He looked away. That told me everything. He knew she was wrong. He simply didn't care enough to stop her. "Dad." "No." His face tightened. "You're making a big deal out of this." "No, Ethan, I'm finally realizing how small a deal you've made out of your mother." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked away. That conversation was the first real crack in our relationship. The second crack happened 3 weeks later. After returning to Charlotte, life appeared normal on the surface. I went back to work. Linda returned to her volunteer activities. Ethan continued working at the company. Vanessa continued acting as though nothing had happened. But internally, I was changing. For the first time in years, I began looking at my business objectively. I stopped looking at Ethan as my son. Instead, I evaluated him as a future leader. And what I saw worried me. He arrived late, left early, avoided difficult decisions, expected promotions, expected authority, expected respect, expected ownership, but rarely earned any of it. At the same time, someone else kept standing out. A young man named Daniel Carter. Daniel was 32 years old. He had started at Walker Freight Solutions almost 15 years earlier as a warehouse assistant. No family connections, no special treatment, no shortcuts. Everything he achieved came through hard work. He learned every department: operations, sales, logistics, customer service, finance. Whenever there was a problem, Daniel solved it. Whenever there was a crisis, Daniel stayed late. Whenever employees needed help, Daniel showed up. And unlike Ethan, people actually respected him. One afternoon, I watched Daniel handling a difficult client situation. The client was furious. Deadlines had changed. Costs had increased. The contract was at risk. Daniel calmly listened, took responsibility, and found a solution. The client left, satisfied. As I watched from my office window, I found myself wondering something I had never seriously considered before. What if the best person to run my company wasn't my son? The thought stayed with me. Weeks passed, then months. And the more I observed, the stronger that thought became. One evening I met Linda for dinner. We sat outside at a small restaurant overlooking a lake. The weather was perfect. The conversation wasn't. Because eventually I brought up the subject that had been weighing on me. "What do you think about Ethan running the company someday?" Linda became very quiet. That alone worried me. Because Linda always tried to see the best in people. "What?" I asked. She sighed. "Do you want the honest answer?" "Yes." She looked down at her glass. "I don't think he's ready." I nodded slowly, because deep down I already knew. She continued, "And honestly, Richard, I don't think Vanessa wants the company because she loves it." I raised an eyebrow. "Then why?" Linda gave a sad smile. because she loves what it can buy. That sentence stayed with me. A week later, something happened that pushed me even closer to a decision. The company hosted an annual leadership meeting. Department heads, managers, executives, everyone attended. During the meeting, we discussed long-term growth strategies. Daniel presented a brilliant expansion plan, detailed, realistic, profitable. Everyone was impressed. Then Ethan interrupted him, not with a better idea, not with useful feedback, just criticism, petty criticism, jealous criticism. After the meeting ended, several executives privately approached me. One of them had worked beside me for 20 years. He closed my office door and quietly said, "Richard, can I speak freely?" "Of course." He hesitated, then said something I will never forget. "If Ethan takes over this company, a lot of good people are going to leave." That hit hard, because it came from someone who cared about the business as much as I did. And suddenly I realized something. This wasn't just about family anymore. Hundreds of employees depended on Walker Freight Solutions. Families depended on it. Careers depended on it. I had a responsibility larger than inheritance, larger than tradition, larger than blood. A few days later, I scheduled a private lunch with Daniel. He assumed we were discussing operations. He was wrong. After casual conversation, I asked him a question. "Daniel, have you ever thought about owning a company?" He laughed. "Only in my dreams." I smiled. What if that dream wasn't impossible? The look on his face told me he had no idea where the conversation was going. And honestly, neither did I. Not yet. But for the first time, I was beginning to see a future that didn't include Ethan sitting in my chair. A future based on merit instead of entitlement. A future that would eventually lead to the biggest decision of my life. And while I was quietly exploring that possibility, Vanessa was already making plans for the company she believed she would soon inherit. She had no idea how wrong she was. The funny thing about entitled people is that they eventually stop hiding their intentions. For years, Vanessa had disguised her greed behind polite smiles and carefully chosen words. But after the cruise, she became noticeably bolder. It was as if she believed the future was already secured. In her mind, Walker Freight Solutions no longer belonged to me. It belonged to Ethan, and by extension, it belonged to her. About 2 months after the cruise, Ethan invited Linda and me to dinner at their house. Normally, Linda would have been excited. This time she wasn't. Neither was I. But we went anyway. Part of me still hoped there was a chance to repair the damage. Part of me still wanted my son back. When we arrived, Vanessa greeted us with her usual perfect smile. The house was beautiful. Of course it was, because a large portion of the down payment had come from money I had quietly given Ethan years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dinner started pleasantly enough. We talked about travel, work, sports, the weather. For nearly an hour, everything remained calm. Then Vanessa changed the subject. "Richard," she said casually, "have you thought any more about retirement?" I looked at her. "A little." Her smile widened. "You deserve it." I nodded. "Maybe." Ethan joined in. "You've worked hard long enough, Dad." There was something rehearsed about the conversation, something coordinated. I could feel it. Then Vanessa delivered the line she had clearly been waiting to say. "When the transition happens, Ethan already has some ideas about modernizing the company." The transition. Interesting choice of words. Not if. When. I took a sip of water. "What transition?" For a split second, both of them looked surprised, almost nervous. Then Ethan laughed. "You know what she means." "No," I said calmly. "I don't." Silence. Vanessa leaned forward. "The ownership transition." There it was, finally, out in the open. Linda lowered her eyes toward her plate. I could tell she was uncomfortable. I wasn't. Not anymore. "Who told you there would be an ownership transition?" I asked. Vanessa blinked, then smiled. "Well, eventually." Eventually could mean 20 years. The smile disappeared. Ethan shifted in his chair. "Dad, nobody's trying to pressure you." I almost laughed, because that was exactly what they were doing. For the next 30 minutes, they kept circling back to the company. Future plans, future leadership, future authority, future ownership. And every time they spoke, One thing became clearer. Neither of them talked about the employees. Neither of them talked about customers. Neither of them talked about protecting the company. They only talked about what they wanted. More power, more control, more money. When Linda and I drove home that night, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she looked at me. "I think they've already spent the inheritance in their heads." I glanced at her. She wasn't wrong. That realization pushed me to move faster. Over the following weeks, I met privately with attorneys, financial advisors, and corporate consultants. Nobody knew. Not Ethan. Not Vanessa. Not even most of my executive team. I wanted professional opinions. Objective opinions. Every expert asked me the same question. Who is the best person to lead the company? Not once did they ask who my son was. Not once did they ask who deserved the inheritance. They asked who could actually do the job, and every honest answer pointed toward Daniel. Meanwhile, Daniel continued proving himself. One of our largest clients experienced a major logistics emergency. A manufacturing shutdown threatened millions of dollars in losses. Daniel worked almost 72 hours over 4 days coordinating solutions. He barely slept, he barely went home, and he saved the contract. The client later called me personally. "You've got a future CEO there." I thanked him. But inside, those words stayed with me. Future CEO. Several weeks later, I invited Daniel to my office. When he arrived, he looked concerned. Probably thought he was in trouble. I smiled. "Relax, you're not getting fired." He laughed. "That's good to know." Then I asked him a question. "Why do you work so hard?" His answer surprised me. Because it wasn't about money. It wasn't about promotions. It wasn't about status. He simply said, "Because somebody gave me a chance when nobody else would." Then he told me something I had never known. Years earlier, when his father died unexpectedly, Daniel had nearly dropped out of college. He worked nights, studied during the day, lived in a tiny apartment, and struggled just to survive. Walker Freight Solutions had hired him when other companies wouldn't. He never forgot that. Neither did I. That conversation affected me more than he realized, because for the first time I wasn't comparing Daniel to Ethan. I was comparing gratitude to entitlement, character to arrogance, respect to selfishness, and the difference was enormous. A month later, I made my decision. The biggest decision of my professional life. The decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to leave the company to Ethan. Instead, I would sell controlling ownership to Daniel through a structured executive buyout agreement supported by financing and equity arrangements. It wasn't charity. Daniel would earn it, build it, lead it, the way I had, the way Ethan never bothered to. The paperwork took weeks, meetings, legal reviews, financial structures, contracts, signatures. Everything had to be done correctly. During that entire process, Ethan and Vanessa remained completely unaware. In fact, they became more confident than ever. One Sunday afternoon, Linda and I attended a family barbecue at Ethan's house. Several friends were there, neighbors, co-workers, relatives. At one point, I walked past the patio and accidentally overheard Vanessa speaking to a group of guests. She didn't know I was standing nearby. "Once Ethan takes over the company," she said confidently, "we'll probably move into a much larger house." The guests nodded. Vanessa continued, "And honestly, there are a lot of people at the company who'll probably need replacing." I stood quietly and listened. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. One guest asked about me. Vanessa laughed. "Oh, Richard loves feeling important, but eventually he'll have to let go." Everyone laughed politely. Everyone except me. Because at that moment, I realized something important. Vanessa wasn't waiting for my retirement. She was waiting for my disappearance. Not physically, financially, professionally, emotionally. She viewed Linda and me as obstacles standing between her and the life she wanted. That night, I told Linda everything. The attorneys, the meetings, the buyout structure, the possibility of Daniel becoming owner. She listened quietly. Then she asked only one question. "Do you believe it's the right thing to do?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She smiled. "Then do it." I looked at her. "No concerns?" She shook her head. "Richard, a company isn't a family heirloom. It's a responsibility. That was one of the reasons I loved her. She always understood what really mattered. Over the next several weeks, the final documents were completed. Everything was ready. All that remained was the announcement. I decided to make it public, very public. Not because I wanted revenge, at least that's what I told myself. But if I'm being honest, a small part of me wanted Ethan and Vanessa to experience exactly what Linda had experienced on that cruise ship. Shock, humiliation, consequences. So I scheduled a company-wide leadership event at our Charlotte headquarters. Executives, managers, employees, business partners, everyone would be there. Officially, the event was described as a major corporate announcement regarding the future of Walker Freight Solutions. The invitation immediately excited Ethan. He called me that same evening. "Dad, is this finally it?" I smiled while holding the phone. "What do you mean?" "The succession announcement." I looked out my office window toward the city skyline, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. Because the future had already been decided. The only thing left was revealing it. And when that day arrived, Ethan and Vanessa were going to discover that their greatest mistake wasn't insulting me. It wasn't insulting my company. It wasn't even underestimating Daniel. Their greatest mistake was humiliating the one person I loved most in the world, my wife. And very soon, the bill for that mistake would come due. The morning of the announcement arrived with clear skies over Charlotte. I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I was nervous. Surprisingly, I wasn't. For months, I had wrestled with my decision. I had questioned it from every angle. I had wondered whether I was being too emotional, too harsh, or too stubborn. But those doubts were gone. The moment I watched Linda cry on that cruise ship, something inside me finally accepted a truth I had been avoiding for years. Being someone's father did not obligate me to reward their behavior, and being someone's son did not automatically qualify them to inherit everything. That morning, Linda and I sat together drinking coffee in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we had celebrated promotions, birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays for decades. She looked calm, much calmer than I expected. "Ready?" she asked. I smiled. "I think so." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "No matter what happens today, I'm proud of you." I nodded. Those words meant more to me than she knew. By 10 o'clock, the headquarters auditorium was filling with people, department managers, executives, employees, business partners, industry contacts, even a few local reporters. Walker Freight Solutions had become one of the region's most respected logistics companies, so any major announcement naturally attracted attention. I stood backstage reviewing my notes, not because I needed them. I had already memorized every word. Across the room, I noticed Ethan and Vanessa entering. The confidence on their faces was impossible to miss. Vanessa wore an expensive cream-colored designer suit. Ethan looked equally polished. They weren't dressed like guests. They were dressed like future owners. Several employees congratulated them before the event even started. I watched Vanessa smile and thank people. She wasn't nervous. Why would she be? In her mind, this was her coronation, the final step toward the life she believed she deserved. A few minutes later, Ethan approached me backstage. He looked excited, almost emotional. "Dad." "Morning." He smiled. "This means a lot." I simply nodded. He continued. "I know you've spent your whole life building this company." There was genuine feeling in his voice. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Then he added, "I promise I'll take it to the next level." And just like that, the guilt disappeared. Because once again he was talking as though the decision had already been made. As though ownership was automatic. As though the company belonged to him simply because he happened to be my son. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll understand everything soon." He smiled. "I know I will." "No, son. You really won't." At 11 o'clock sharp, the event began. The auditorium lights dimmed. Conversations faded. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the stage. I stepped behind the podium. Applause filled the room. For a moment, I simply looked around. 30 years. 30 years of work, sacrifice, risk, failure, recovery, growth. Every major chapter of my life was connected to this company. And today I was closing one chapter while opening another. I thanked everyone for attending. I spoke about the company's history, its growth, its people, its future. The audience listened carefully. Then I shifted the conversation. Many of you know I've spent the last year evaluating the long-term future of Walker Freight Solutions. The room became quieter. Everyone knew what was coming, or at least they thought they did. I continued. One question has guided every decision I've made. I paused. Who is the right person to lead this company into the future? Across the room, Ethan sat up straighter. Vanessa smiled. The answer seemed obvious to them. I kept speaking. I considered experience. I paused. I considered leadership. Another pause. I considered integrity. The smile on Vanessa's face began to weaken. Then I added, and I considered who truly understands the responsibility of serving employees, customers, and communities. Now the room was completely silent. I looked directly toward Ethan, then toward Vanessa. Neither of them looked worried yet. Not yet. Then I delivered the sentence that changed everything. After extensive evaluation, I have chosen the next owner and leader of Walker Freight Solutions. A few people began clapping, assuming they knew what came next. I raised my hand. The applause stopped. Then I smiled. That person is not my son. The room froze. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that feels physical. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. I saw Ethan's face lose color. Vanessa blinked rapidly, as if she had misunderstood. Then I continued. Please join me in welcoming the future owner and CEO of Walker Freight Solutions. I turned toward the side stage. Daniel Carter. The doors opened. Daniel walked onto the stage. The audience erupted. Some people gasped. Others immediately began applauding. Several managers actually stood up, because deep down many of them already knew. They knew who had earned it. Daniel looked stunned. Even though he knew about the agreement, the reality of the moment clearly overwhelmed him. He shook my hand. The applause continued. I glanced toward Ethan. His expression looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Vanessa looked even worse. Shock, confusion, disbelief, panic. Every emotion appeared at once. The future they had spent years imagining had just vanished, and they were watching it happen in real time. When the applause finally ended, I continued my speech. I explained Daniel's history with the company, his leadership, his sacrifices, his accomplishments. The more I spoke, the more obvious the decision became. Even people who were initially surprised began nodding, because merit made sense, entitlement didn't. Then came the moment Ethan couldn't stay quiet anymore. He stood up. Dad! The room turned toward him. His voice was shaking. What is this? I looked at him calmly. This is the future of the company. His face reddened. I'm your son. The statement hung in the air. Not an argument, not a qualification, just a biological fact. I nodded. Yes, you are. Then how can you do this? I remained calm, because I had already lived through the anger phase months ago. Now only clarity remained. I looked directly at him. Because ownership is not a birthright. The room became silent again. Ethan stared at me, unable to respond. Then Vanessa stood, and unlike Ethan, she wasn't sad. She was furious, purely furious, and judging by the look in her eyes, she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Vanessa stood so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over behind her. Every eye in the auditorium turned toward her. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then she pointed directly at Daniel. This is ridiculous. The room became completely silent. Daniel remained standing beside me, looking uncomfortable. Vanessa didn't care. She was no longer trying to appear polite. The mask was gone. This company belongs to Ethan. A few people exchanged awkward glances. Some employees looked down at the floor. Others simply stared. Vanessa continued. My husband spent years here. That statement alone was insulting. Because many people in that room had spent decades building Walker Freight Solutions. They knew exactly who carried the company and who merely worked there. I calmly looked at her. No, Vanessa. Her face tightened. No? No. This company belongs to the people who earned the responsibility to lead it. The room remained silent. Then something happened that I never expected. Several senior managers began nodding. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. Vanessa saw it, and it made her even angrier. She turned toward the audience. "Seriously? You're all okay with this?" Nobody answered, because nobody wanted to lie. The truth was obvious. Daniel had earned their respect. Ethan had expected it. There is a difference. Vanessa looked at Ethan. She clearly expected him to rescue the situation, but Ethan looked completely lost. His confidence had vanished. For the first time in his life, nobody was protecting him from consequences. Then Vanessa turned back toward me. "You're doing this because of one stupid vacation." The second those words left her mouth, I knew she had made a mistake. A huge mistake. Because she still didn't understand. It was never about the vacation. It was about what the vacation revealed. I walked away from the podium and stood directly in front of her. "You're wrong." She crossed her arms. "Am I?" "Yes." The room listened carefully. I continued. "This decision wasn't made because of one vacation." I paused. "It was made because that vacation showed me exactly who you and Ethan really are." Neither of them spoke, so I continued. For years I ignored the comments. I looked directly at Vanessa. The insults. Then at Ethan. The silence. Then I looked toward the audience. And eventually I realized something. If someone can treat their own family with disrespect, they will eventually treat employees, customers, and partners the same way. The room remained silent. Several people nodded, because they knew I was right. Vanessa looked around and realized she was losing. Badly. Then she tried a different approach. She suddenly softened her voice. "Richard?" Interesting. Now it was Richard. Not old-fashioned, not outdated, not in the way. Richard. "I think we're just misunderstanding each other." I almost laughed. Months earlier, she would have called that growth. Today, I called it panic. "No," I said calmly. "I understand perfectly." The room became quiet again. Then I said something that neither Ethan nor Vanessa expected. "Would you like to know when I made the final decision?" Neither answered, so I answered for them. "The night of the captain's gala dinner." Vanessa's face immediately changed. She knew exactly what I meant. I continued. "The moment Linda walked out of that ballroom in tears." The room became even quieter. Many people could see the emotion in my face, because even months later, that memory still hurt. I looked directly at Ethan. "You watched your mother cry." His eyes dropped to the floor. "You watched someone humiliate her." Still silence. "And you did nothing." For the first time all day, Ethan looked genuinely ashamed. Not angry. Ashamed. I wasn't sure whether it was because he finally understood what he had done, or because hundreds of people were watching. Maybe both. Then something unexpected happened. Linda stood up. She hadn't planned to speak. I hadn't planned for her to speak. But she slowly walked toward the stage. The entire room watched. She stopped beside me and took my hand. Then she looked at Ethan. For several seconds, she simply looked at her son. The boy she had raised. The boy she had protected. The boy she had loved his entire life. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I never wanted your father's company." Ethan looked up. "I never cared about the money." Her eyes filled slightly with tears. "All I ever wanted was respect." Those words hit harder than anything I had said all day, because they were true. Linda never asked for luxury, never asked for status, never asked for power. She only wanted kindness, and somehow that had become too much for them to give. The room remained silent. Several people looked emotional. Even Daniel looked uncomfortable witnessing such a personal moment. Then Linda smiled sadly. "I hope one day you understand that." After saying those words, she squeezed my hand and stepped back. Nobody applauded. Nobody moved. Because some moments are too real for applause. Finally, I returned to the podium. I thanked everyone for attending. I officially introduced Daniel as the future owner and CEO. The audience erupted into applause. This time the applause was even louder, and it was genuine. The event ended shortly afterward. People surrounded Daniel, congratulating him, shaking his hand, celebrating his achievement. Meanwhile, Ethan and Vanessa quietly left. No dramatic exit, no final speech, no last argument, just silence. For the first time since I had known her, Vanessa had nothing to say. Over the following months, Daniel smoothly transitioned into leadership. The company continued growing, employees felt optimistic, customers remained loyal, the future looked strong. As for Ethan and Vanessa, things changed quickly. Without the future ownership they expected, many of their plans collapsed. The larger house never happened. The luxury lifestyle they imagined never materialized. More importantly, they finally learned that assumptions are not inheritances. A year later, Ethan asked to meet me. Just the two of us. No Vanessa, no audience, no excuses. We met at a small coffee shop in Charlotte. He looked older, tired, humbled. Life had finally taught him lessons that I could not. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me. "Dad, I was wrong." I studied his face. For once, I believed him. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for ownership. He wasn't asking for favors. He was simply apologizing, and that mattered. Over time, our relationship slowly improved. Not because everything was forgotten, because it wasn't. Some wounds leave scars, but scars are different from open wounds. They hurt less. As for Vanessa, she remained distant, polite, careful, much quieter than before. Maybe she changed. Maybe she didn't. Honestly, I no longer cared, because my happiness was no longer dependent on her approval. One evening, nearly 2 years after the cruise, Linda and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted orange and gold. The air was calm, peaceful. She leaned her head against my shoulder, just like she had done countless times over the years. "Any regrets?" she asked. I thought about it carefully. Then I smiled. "Only one." She laughed softly. "What's that?" I looked at her. "I should have stood up for you sooner." Her eyes watered. Then she squeezed my hand. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. Not because I had won, not because Ethan and Vanessa had lost, but because I had finally protected the person who had spent 30 years protecting me. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story of family, betrayal, justice, and second chances. Now I'd love to hear from you. Do you think Richard made the right decision by giving his company to Daniel instead of Ethan, or should he have given his son one more chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.